Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for coming to enjoy the annual Weissman lecture. The lecture is generally given by someone that we've identified as one of our outstanding smicha talmidim who is planning on pursuing a career in a medical field, and it's a great zechus that we know that we have people of such caliber like Elazar Mermelstein, who's going to be someone who's going to be working with, as a doctor eventually, with such a tremendous background in learning, and who's been one of the fixtures of our Beit Midrash for several years, and such an outstanding Talmud in the yeshiva. It's such an important thing to have people who have that sensitivity, as Rabbanim who deal with doctors and with the piskei halacha that doctors sometimes try to give. It's very important to know that you have doctors who have the sensitivity to understand what halacha is and what halacha requires, and are sensitive to from people and the needs of Ovdei Hashem. And gives us great hope for the future to have talmidim like Elazar, and we're very happy that he has agreed to deliver the Weissman lecture this year.
Rishus, Rav Shechter, Rabbi, family, friends, thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you, Rabbi Leibowitz, for those very kind and probably undeserved words. A special thank you to the Weissman family for dedicating this shiur in honor of Dr. Abraham and Phyllis Weissman. After listening to some of the previous shiurim and hearing from both those who delivered the shiurim and from Rav Shechter a little bit about the kind of person that Dr. Weissman was, it's a big zchus to be able to learn Torah in his memory. From what I heard, gathered a little bit, he was the type of person that all from doctors, I think, should aspire to emulate in the care, dedication, and yiras shamayim that he expressed in his field. So in previous years, I think that the shiur was generally on a more focused and specific topic. We have some previous deliverers of the shiur in the room. You can ask them about it later. But I think that this year I want to maybe focus a little bit more on Refuah in general and how the Torah views the profession of a physician. So I think the source sheets are maybe not here quite yet, so just bear with me for a little bit, please. The pasuk in Parshas Mishpatim in Sefer Shmos, Parak Chaf Aleph, Psukim Yud Ches and Yud Tes describe what happens when two people are involved in a physical altercation with each other. Two people are involved in some sort of fight, and one hits his friend, he damages him. If this person who was assaulted is later able to get up, to walk out, he's maybe damaged, he's leaning on a cane, so the person who struck him, his friend, is not liable to any physical punishment. He's not chayiv malkos, he's not chayiv misa. Rak shivto yitain v'rapo yirape. He is liable to monetary compensation, to compensate the person that he struck for loss of work, and heal him he shall heal, v'rapo yirape. If we would have maybe just looked at that pasuk in isolation, we would have said that the Torah seems to be endorsing physicians, it seems to be endorsing doctors. There are medical bills that the makeh, the person who strikes his friend, is liable to pay. Medical bills usually result from doctors treating. That seems to be an endorsement for the treatment, for a doctor to treat someone who is damaged, who is sick. However, the Ibn Ezra, on that pasuk, has a little bit of a different take. I'm going to read a little bit inside. The Ibn Ezra says, this pasuk is telling me that the Rofei, the doctor, has permission to heal someone from external wounds, something that might be external. Rak kol choli shehu bifnim begof biyad Hashem l'raposel. However, something that's internal, some illness that we cannot see on the outside, that's biyad Hashem to heal. That the Torah was not discussing in this pasuk. The Ibn Ezra then brings a couple of rayos to this idea. He quotes a couple of different psukim that describe Hashem being the one to heal, how Asa was chastised for not going to the Navi, for not being Doresh Hashem. Rather, he went to the Rofim. That seems to be a taina on him. The Ibn Ezra then brings a grammatical proof from a binyan kal, binyan kaved. I didn't understand it, so I'm not going to explain that here. But then the Ibn Ezra points out, V'chachaminu kiblu dvarim achirim. Chazal had a different Kabbalah regarding this topic. He doesn't explain what it is. He's coming to explain the pashtus of the psukim. He's saying Chazal had some other take. So what's he referring to? The pashtus, I think, is that he's referring to the Gemara in Bava Kama on Daf Pei Hey. The Gemara says, Ripoy detana beikra lamali. Why did the Torah need to double up to tell me that there is a chiyuv to pay for medical bills? So the Gemara explains that this is necessary to teach me. The Brisa taught the Beit Bishmal, the Tanya, the Beit Bishmal Omer, v'rapo yirapeh mikan shenitan rishus l'ropeh l'rapos. This is the source in the Torah for the permission granted to a doctor to heal. Both Rashi and Tosfos, in slightly different formulations, explain that I would have thought without this pasuk that there's an issue in treating someone. What's the issue? Hashem caused him to get sick. Who am I to start meddling and mess with Hashem's master plan? The Ramban in Teres HaAdam has two pshatim in explaining this Gemara. The second pshat that he gives is in line with Rashi and Tosfos. The first pshat that he gives says that the Torah needs to grant rishus because engaging with someone who is sick and trying to treat them can end up causing more damage than what was originally there. So you might have thought, what right do I have to take that risk? I might make him worse. Kamash malon v'rapo yirape, to tell me that the Torah actually is endorsing this. These approaches, the second approach in the Ramban, the Rashi, Tosfos, seem to directly contradict what the Ibn Ezra was saying. The distinction that the Ibn Ezra made between cholam b'achutz and cholam b'fnim, that I would have thought something that seems to come directly from Hashem. I don't have the right to treat. Rashi, Tosfos, the Ramban are explaining that the Gemara is coming la'afuke to exclude from that havamina. So is it so pashut? It seems to be there's a clear-cut Gemara against what the Ibn Ezra had suggested as the pshat in the pasuk. However, the Gemara in Brachos and Daf Samach quotes a machlokas, it seems, between Rav Acha and Abaye. Rav Acha explains that a person who is entering into a bloodletting endeavor, he's going for this procedure that's supposed to heal him, he should say a tefillah. He should say, Yehi ratzon milfanecha Hashem Elokai, that this asek should be l'refuah, because Hashem, you really are the one who is in charge, who determines whether something is l'refuah or not. So why am I engaging in this procedure at all? She'in darkan shal b'nei adam b'refuos ela shen nahagu. This is the minhag. This is what the Welt does. So while it's true that this might not actually correlate to the outcome, the procedure that I'm engaging in might not have any effect on the outcome, this is the minhag ha'olam, so this is what I'm going to do, but otherwise I don't really have a right to engage in this procedure. So Rav Acha seems to clearly, almost I would say clearly, be on the side of the Ibn Ezra. Abaye argues and he says, Lo leima inashachai, a person should not actually say this tefillah, Ditana de Rabbi Shmuel, v'rapo yirape, mikan shenitna rishus l'ropeh l'rapos. Abaye, based on the Brisa we quoted from the Gemara in Bava Kama, explains that this tefillah is out of place here. A doctor does have license to heal. We believe in physicians. We believe that a person should go and get treatment. Therefore, while it might be a good idea to also daven, the tefillah stating explicitly that our engaging in these procedures doesn't do anything, that's not appropriate. If so, if this really does seem to be a machlokas amoraim, Why is the Ibn Ezra so confident that Chazal had a different Kabbalah? Yeah, some of Chazal had a different Kabbalah. Abaye maybe had a different Kabbalah. Rav Acha seems to be on the Ibn Ezra's team. So why is it so pashut to the Ibn Ezra that Chazal did not agree with his pshat in the pasuk? Maybe one can explain because Rav Acha seems to be refuted. There's a brisa against Rav Acha. Rav Acha's an Amora. He's not entitled to argue on a brisa. So it's possible, but I would maybe suggest that Rav Acha has an easy explanation of the brisa. The brisa is talking exactly as the Ibn Ezra explained on the pasuk. It's talking about cholaim that are bachutz, things that are external. So that the Torah gives rishus for. Mehecha tesi that there's rishus to treat illnesses that are internal. Okay, so if we don't have a raya from the Gemara in Bava Kama, from the Gemara in Brachos, against the Ibn Ezra's pshat, are there any other Ma'amari Chazal that may indicate that they were Mikabel against the Ibn Ezra, maybe against Rav Acha? So that brings us to source 4. The Gemara in Sanhedrin on Daf Ayin Gimel asks, Minayin l'ro'as chaveru shehu toveh benahar, o chayeg or raso, o listin ba'im alav shehu chayev latzilo? How do we know that if a person sees his friend is drowning, his friend is being attacked by bandits, by animals, how do we know that there is a chiyuv to save him? The Gemara explains, there seems to be a pasuk directly addressing this case. Lo samad adam reyacha, don't stand idly by while your friend is bleeding out. The Gemara asks, is that really the source for the chiyuv to save someone else? Mehasam nafka. We have learned it from other psukim. Avedas gufo minayin. How do we know that in the parsha of Hashavas Aveda, the chiyuv to return someone's lost object, how do we know that that includes his own body, his own physical well-being? Talmud lomar v'hashevo solo. The pasuk tells me, return him to him. That's the way Rashi explains the drasha. It's an extra lashon that's unnecessarily there that we get to darshan v'hashevo solo, return him to him. Ime hasam hava mina hani mili b'nafshay. So the Gemara explains, had I just had the pasuk of Hashevo Solo, I would have said, there is a personal chiyuv on myself to engage in this hashava. But I would have said that when it comes to expending money or expending additional effort, I'm not mechuyev to do so. Kamash malan. Therefore, we need a second pasuk of Lo samad adam re'acha telling me that there actually is a chiyuv to save this person's life, seemingly no matter the cost or the situation. If so, why do we need the pasuk of V'rapo Yerape? There are two psukim, Hashavas Aveda, or Hashavas Gufo, Lo samad adam re'acha, telling me I need to save someone. Why does the Torah need to give reshus l'rofe l'rapos? So if we look in source 5, the Tosas Harash on the Gemara in Brachos actually asks this question. He quotes from the Meir Orleans, or Yaakov Meir Orleans, this question. First, the first answer that he quotes from the Meir Orleans, starting from the bolded part of source 5, V'tireit shenitan rishus l'rapos b'schar. The pasuk of V'rapo Yerape is not actually telling me that there's a chiyuv to heal, or a license to heal. What it's telling me is that there's a license to heal for pay. I would have thought that there's a mitzvah. I'm not allowed to charge for doing something that anyway I'm mechuyev to do. V'rapo Yerape tells me that I am allowed to do so. That fits very well in the context of the pasuk, which, as we explained, is talking about compensation for medical bills. So it's talking about the schar, and it fits with the lashon of rishus. It's permission. It's not something that I'm mechuyev to do. The chiyuv is to save. The rishus is to heal, is to charge. The second pshat that the Tosas Harash gives is that I would have thought to make exactly the chiluk we proposed in the Ibn Ezra. The Ibn Ezra could have explained Brisa, the Rabbi Shmuel, as being limited to chalaim that are bachutz. Kamash malan, V'rapo Yerape, on top of the pre-existing chiyuv of Lo samad adam re'acha and V'hashevo Solo, telling me that there are no distinctions. All sicknesses, anything physically wrong with a person, I have license to heal. So again, this will explain why the Ibn Ezra is so confident that Chazal did not actually explain the pasuk in the way that he did. Okay. That leads us, I think, to the next question. We've explained what Lo Samal Adam Re'echa adds on top of V'hashev Osalo. We've explained what V'rapo Yirape potentially is adding on top of that. Why do I need V'hashev Osalo? Lo Samal Adam Re'echa tells me that I'm mechuyev to expend extra energy. It tells me that I am mechuyev to hire people to save his life. Why do I need V'hashev Osalo? What is that adding? So one possibility is that Lo Samal Adam Re'echa would have otherwise been limited to cases that are life-threatening. If a person, stubs their toe, that's usually not life-threatening. How do we know that there's a chiyuv to treat that, to make him feel better? V'hashev Osalo tells me that. So that's potentially one possibility. If so, that would mean, I think, that there are basically two different psukim, or two different mitzvos, that overlap with each other. V'hashev Osalo and Lo Samal Adam Re'echa telling me both a chiyuv to heal, to treat illness, or to treat physical pain, but covering different cases, covering different chiyuvim. The problem with this is that many Rishonim, and Be'ezus Hashem soon we'll see in source 6, the Ran in Nedarim explicitly says this, but many Rishonim, when they quote the mitzvah to heal, only reference V'hashev Osalo. They don't seem to describe this as two different mitzvos. They seem to say the mitzvah is V'hashev Osalo, Lo Samal Adam Re'echa is just some extra drasha. What's the context for this Ran? So the Mishnah in Nedarim on Daf Lamed Ches is speaking about someone who is mudar hana from his friend. Person A is not allowed to cause benefit for person B, and then person B falls ill. So the Mishnah first starts talking about the dinam of Bikar Cholim in such a case. Is person A allowed to be Mevakar? And then the Mishnah has a line, the end of line 1 in source 6, Umar Peyu Refuas Nefesh Avalo Refuas Mamon. He can heal him Refuas Nefesh, but not Refuas Mamon. So the Gemara on that particular line in the Mishnah is a couple of blot later on Daf Mem Aleph Amud Beis. The Gemara asks, Umar Peyu Refuas Nefesh Heicha Kitani. What does that mean? What is this distinction between Refuas Nefesh and Refuas Mamon? The Gemara explains, or first the Gemara suggests, maybe what the Gemara means is that it's mutter to treat him for free. It's not mutter to charge money, because then I'm benefiting. So if that was the case, if that's really what the Mishnah meant, why didn't it just say that? What's this cryptic lashon of refuas nefesh, avalo refuas mamon? So the Gemara explains, al refuas nefesh gufo, refuas mamon behemto. If hypothetically a person was a doctor and a vet, he would be capable of treating both human illness and animal sickness. So I would have thought that it's mutter for me to treat both. The Gemara, or the Mishnah really, is telling us in such a case, I'm allowed to treat his own physical illness. I'm not allowed to treat his animals. The Ran, the end of source 6, explains that we're, based on the Yerushalmi, we're talking about a case where there are other doctors around. If there were no other doctors around, of course, I'd even be allowed to treat his animal. It's Hashavas Aveda. Hashavas Aveda is mutter. Given that there are other doctors around, I'm not allowed to treat his other animals, again, because it's a case of mudar hana. However, I am allowed to treat him. And the line he quotes from the Yerushalmi is, Shalomin hakol adam zocha lehisrapos. A person is not zocha to be treated just by anyone. Given that there's a slight chance my treatment will have a better effect than others, it's mutter for me to treat him. The Ran, previously in that paragraph, was explicit. The mitzvah being mekayim here is v'hashev osalo hashavas gufa. V'hashev osalo, as we've explained, is a pasuk from the parasha of Hashavas Aveda. The Ran is now telling me that that same pasuk from Hashavas Aveda allows me to treat him, but not his animal, which is a mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. How can we make such a distinction? How can we say that it's mutter to be mekayim half of the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda, but not the other half? Why is there a distinction between people and animals? So this might be based on the Gemara in Sanhedrin, right? The Gemara in Sanhedrin we've previously explained makes some sort of connection between Lo Samal Adam Re'echa and V'hashev Osalo. Why did the Gemara think that from the pasuk of V'hashev Osalo, I would not have thought to try extra harder to hire people. Now that the Torah tells me, all of a sudden, now I realize I'm mechuyev even to hire people. Why does one mitzvah tell me anything more than the other? So this might just be a logical interpretation of the two psukim. We know that Hashavas Aveda has certain limitations. L'mashal, zaken ve'eno lefi kvoda. If a person sees an Aveda on the ground and it's beneath his dignity to pick it up, he's not mechuyev in the mitzvah. Hashavas Aveda has very specific limitations. So I may have thought that just like it's limited in other cases, maybe it doesn't extend towards cases where I have to hire other people, where I have to expand extra energy. Lo sauna damriyacha, I have no reason to think that. Lo sauna damriyacha, it's very logical. It's in any case that I'm mechuyev to, any case that I'm capable of doing, I'm mechuyev to. If that's true, so then the hagdara of the mitzvah that I'm performing, the boundaries, the cases that are included in the mitzvah, seem to be based on lo sauna damriyacha. The hagdara of the mitzvah is lo sauna damriyacha. Yet, all the Rishonim seem to describe the Kiyum HaMitzvah as Hashavas Aveda. I don't know that that's necessarily a problem. What we're saying is that there's a mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda that is bound, that is mugdar by Lo Samod Al Damriyacha. If that's true, then maybe going back to the Gemara in Nidarim, we can explain why there's a distinction between animals that are sick and people that are sick. Animals that are sick are just a mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. Treating his animals is just Hashavas Aveda. Hashavas Aveda has a very specific context. It's mugdar by other cases. So the couple of, let's say, extra percentage points that I may have added on top of other doctors is not enough of a mitzvah to get me out of the Isser Hana that was placed in this scenario. However, L'samad al Damriyacha expands that mitzvah. Tells me, in any possible case, do not stand idly by. If so, the Yerushalmi Svar that they're unquoted of Lo min hakol adam zochel etzrapos, that slight possibility that I might do a better job, maybe is enough to trigger the chiyuv of L'samad al Damriyacha and not Hashavas Aveda alone. Once it's within the parameters of L'samad al Damriyacha, the Kiyum HaMitzvah is Hashavas Aveda. So the Ran can call treating a person Hashavas Aveda, yet still say it has a different Hagdara than regular Hashavas Aveda. If so, we can return to our earlier question. Why do I need the pasuk of V'rapo Yirape? Why do I need that rishus? Once we see that the Hagdara is not from Hashavas Aveda, the Hagdara of the mitzvah is from Lo Samad al Damriyacha, I don't have a question for why I would have thought this is different than other Hashavas Aveda, where we don't necessarily assume there's a distinction between something that's Babi De Shamayim versus something that's Babi Biad Basar Vadam, because I have no reason to assume the Hagdara of this mitzvah is Hashavas Aveda. Again, we have a mitzvah of Lo Samad al Damriyacha. We have a mitzvah of Hashevosalo. Why would I have thought to distinguish, like the Ibn Ezra suggested, and therefore V'rapo Yirape needed to give rishus? Why is that necessary? Hashavas Aveda, that's not necessarily true. That distinction doesn't necessarily exist. But now that we say that the Hagdara is from L'samad al Damriyacha, I think that chiluk is much more logical. When it comes to Hashavas Aveda, if I see something falls out of my friend's pocket, so I don't know whether that was his own negligence, right? That's Biad Adam. He knew he had a hole in his pocket and didn't care. Or, I don't know, a mouse came, bit his pants, and then something fell out of his pocket. One's Biad Adam, one's Bidei Shamayim. I have no reason to distinguish. When it comes to L'samad al Damriyacha, if I see my friend drowning, so I would have maybe logically thought to distinguish between cases where someone pushed him into the river versus Hashem created some tsunami and swept him away. I would have maybe thought logically that in the latter case, I'm not supposed to meddle. That's coming Bidei Shamayim. That's very clearly Bidei Shamayim. That's why I need V'rapo Yirape to tell me the Hashevosalo still applies in such a case. Once the Hagdara of the mitzvah is L'samad al Damriyacha, I need another pasuk to expand it further to include cases that are ba bidei shamayim. Okay. So I think whether or not one accepts my proposal, this answer to make all the different gemaras, all the different psukim shtim, I think that it is very clear from an analysis of the Rishonim that everyone agrees there is some mitzvah of refuah. Whether it's lo samno adam re'echa, whether it's v'hashevosalo, hashavas aveda, whether you need v'rapo yirape on top of that or not, there clearly is some sort of mitzvah here. If so, how does the Torah view performing mitzvahs in a professional capacity? Source 7, the Mishnah in Bechoros describes Hanot al scharo ladon dina b'telim. A person who takes schar in order to judge a case, any judgment that he renders is batal. Laha'id edusa b'telim. Similarly, if a person takes schar to testify on his friend's behalf, the same din. Lahazos lakadesh me'emav me'ma'ara ifro ifar makla. If a person takes schar to be involved in the preparation of the para aduma, that also it passes the para aduma. The Mishnah then has one exception, schar that is mutter to take, im hayukon metameo mitrumaso, machilu mashko v'sachov, im hayuzakin markiva al-chamar v'nosin lo scharo kipal. What that essentially boils down to, without getting into the weeds here, is that any loss that he incurs because of the mitzvah that he's performing, he's allowed to be compensated for, but I'm not allowed to pay him for the act that he's doing. The Gemara asks, Minahani Mili, how do I know that this is true, that I'm not allowed to take schar? Amar of Yehud Amar Av, the Amar Kra, Re'eli Madati Aschem, Ma'ani Bechinam, Afatem Bechinam. Just as Hashem taught us the Torah for free, He didn't charge us, we didn't pay Him, so too I am not allowed to teach Torah, and by extension perform certain other mitzvos for schar. How does that relate to refuah? The Mishnah lists a couple of cases. The Gemara seems to include Talmud Torah. None of those are refuah. So that the Ramban in Teres HaAdam, the end of source 7, explicitly includes schar refuah. Ramban says, "Inyan schar refuah nearly the mutter lital mehen schar batala v'tircha." It's mutter to take schar batala, which we'll get back to, b'li defining what that is, and schar tircha. Aval schar halimud aser, but it is aser to take schar for telling someone how to treat a certain illness. There's a mitzvah hashavas gufa. V'amrinan le'inyan mitzvos mani b'chinam afatem b'chinam. Hilkach schar hachma v'halimud aser dahavelek schar hazav v'kidosh aval schar tircha mutter dahavelek schar haba'a umiloi demutter. The Ramban distinguishes between schar chachma and limud, teaching someone the appropriate treatment, versus any loss that he may incur in the process. The latter is mutter to take schar for, the former is aser. V'chein schar batala mutter. Schar batala again is going to be mutter. When I spoke to Rav Schachter, the way that he described schar batala to me, and this may not be true in all cases, it might be, maybe we should consult with him, but schar batala is defined by how much money would I be willing to take to not work another day in my life. A person generally has a profession, he has to, take the subway, he has to commute, he has to work hard at his job, and therefore he's compensated a certain amount. Presumably most people would be willing to take less than that compensation in order to not have to go to work. What is that amount that he'd be willing to take in order to not have to work? That's schar batala. So what the Ramban seems to be saying is that only schar batala is mutter for a doctor, for a physician to accept. Is this paskin halacha l'maisa? So in source 8, the Shulchan Aruch in Yeridei and Shin Lamed Vav, which Baruch Hashem I had discussed of learning with Schwartz and Shir just recently. So the Mechaber in Seif Aleph starts off, Nitna Torah Rishus L'Rope L'Rapos. There's permission granted, there's license given to a physician to heal. U'mitzvahi u'bechla pikuach nefeshu. Not only is there Rishus, it's a mitzvah, it's included in pikuach nefesh. V'monea atzmo harizah shofech damim. So the Mechaber at the end of Seif Aleph goes on to describe all the different ways that a doctor can get himself into trouble. If he treats without knowing what he's doing, that's bad. If he doesn't treat and he didn't know what to do, that's also bad. He should be a baki. He should know exactly what it is that he's doing. And then the Mechaber at the end of Seif Aleph paskins that if a person is a baki and he has reshus to heal, he has license to heal, and something goes wrong while he's treating a patient, and the patient dies, so he's chayiv galus, just like anyone else who is horeg b'shogeg. That's Seif Aleph. Seif Beis, harofei aser litol schar hachma v'halimud, avol schar hatoreach v'abatala mutter. The Mechaber seems to be paskining pretty much word for word like the Ramban in Teres HaAdam that we previously read. However, moving on to Seif Gimel, so the Mechaber first describes that a person who has pharmaceuticals, he has the ability to give someone else something that can treat him. He's not allowed to overcharge for that, even if that person is very desperate. He's the only one that has these pharmaceuticals. He's not allowed to overcharge. And if he does overcharge, he's not entitled to keep that money. But then in the bolded part of Seif Gimel, the Mechaber paskins, avalim hisna, b'schar harofe harbe, if instead of talking about pharmaceuticals, we're talking about the actual treatment that the doctor performs, if for that he stipulates he overcharges, chayiv litain lo, he's entitled to that money, shachachmasa machar lo ve'en lo damim. Because the chachma, the wisdom that he gives him, we cannot put a price on that. The Darkei Moshe on Siman Shin Lamed Vav quotes from the Binyamin Ze'ev, similar svar, maybe just a little bit more expanded, explaining that the reason why chachmasa machar lo ve'en lo damim is because that's actually pretty common. Lifa'amim, a person does need to charge above and beyond, or a person does frequently charge above and beyond, and therefore it's not considered to be overcharging, even if we say that this is not something that should be done. The Ramah, just going back to Seif Gimel, commenting on the Shulchan Aruch, says he's entitled to keep this money, even though he does have a mitzvah to treat. The reason he's entitled to keep the money is because this is a mitzvah that's incumbent upon multiple people. He's not the only one. And therefore, if he says, I'm only going to do this mitzvah, if someone pays me, he's entitled to keep that money. What's the difference between Seif Beis and Seif Gimel? In Seif Beis, the Mechaber paskins, it is aser to take money for refuah. In Seif Gimel, the Mechaber paskins, if he was hisna schar harbe, he's entitled to that money. So I think the pashtus is that it depends on whose perspective we're taking. The doctor has to know it's aser for him to charge. The chula has to know if the doctor was over on this iser and he did charge, I'm mechuyev to pay him. So while that may allow doctors who have been practicing up until now to keep the money that they charged, I, Baruch Hashem, have been sitting in yeshiva for the last couple of years. I have not made a single penny and probably won't for a while on refuah. So what's the heter for me to plan on pursuing a profession that seems to be against the Firish, the Shulchan Aruch? Maybe you'll tell me, we saw in the Ramban, we saw the Mechaber quotes this, not all schar is aser, schar chachma is aser, schar batala is mutter. Maybe this is all schar batala. So for that we have source 15, some statistics I pulled up from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. I'm sorry, some of the titles were cut off a little bit. Physicians make significantly more money on average than most other professions. I just included some professions that my peers are pursuing. Accountants, software engineering, psychology, financial advisors, high school rabbiim. Surprisingly, even that last category makes less than a physician, even a high school rabbi. So what's the heter? Turning back to source 9, before source 9. Source 5. We quoted earlier in this year, we quoted the Tosas Harash, B'Shem, the Ri Mei Orleans. The Ri Mei Orleans explained, the pasuk of the Yerapah tells me, there is Rishus L'Rapos B'Schar. There is no Isser. The Isser of Ma'ani B'Chinam does not apply to Refuah. That would be pretty clear cut. The problem is the Ramban and argues, and the Mechaber paskins like the Ramban. So it would be hard to suggest that every doctor in the world is relying on a Rimei or Leans, which even the Tosas Harash doesn't seem to accept. He gives a different answer to that question. Okay, so it's probably not because of this shot in the Tosas. Source 9, the Yad Avram asks a question. He asks on the Mechaber, again, the Mechaber in Seif Aleph ruled that if a doctor accidentally killed someone on the operating table, even if he's a baki, even if he has Rishus Bezdin, he's Chayiv Galus. For the Yad Avram, this seems to be against the Gemara in Makos. The Gemara in Makos says that if a person is performing a mitzvah and accidentally kills someone while performing that mitzvah, he's not Chayiv Galus. The examples given are a Shliach Bezdin that's giving someone Malkos and he kills them, he's not Chayiv Galus. Av, who is trying to mechanech his child and kills him, is not Chayiv Galus. A Rebbe who's trying to mechanech and kills his Talmud is not Chayiv Galus. So why is the doctor different? The Yad Avram has a very interesting take on Refuah. What he explains, the bolded part of source 9, V'yishlomer deshani hacha shlo asa mitzvah b'refu aso kishemis. A shliach bezdin that is beating someone, the act of beating is the mitzvah. A Rebbe or a father who is trying to mechanech their son or Talmud, that thing that caused the person to die was the mitzvah, was the chinuch. A doctor that is trying to heal someone and kills them did not do any mitzvah. The mitzvah is to heal. He did not heal. He didn't accomplish that. What the Yad Avram seems to be saying is that the mitzvah of refuah is result-oriented. It's not about the action that I performed. One question we can ask on this Yad Avram is that, as we've previously explained, the mitzvah of refuah is actually a mitzvah of hashavas aveda. Is it so pashut that if I pick up an aveda from the street and don't end up finding the person who lost it, I wasn't mekayim a mitzvah? So it might be. It seems b'pashtus to be machlokas rishonim quoted in the Nimukei Yosef in Bav Metzia on Daf Tazayin b'Daf Be'arif. Thank you to Rabbi Packer for pointing me to that Nimukei Yosef. He seems to quote two different shitas about what exactly the mitzvah of hashavas aveda is. So it's possible the Yad Avram is just passing like one side in a machlokas rishonim, but based on the explanation that we gave earlier in this year, this might not be necessary. If hashavas aveda does not have the same parameters as refuah, if refuah is mugdar by lo samad adam re'echa, it might be mistaver to say that that actually is a result-oriented. Lo samad adam re'echa, there's no kiyum ha-mitzvah if I jump into the river to save my friend and he drowns. Maybe I'm not over a lav, maybe I'm an onis, but I don't know that it's so pashut to say there's a kiyum ha-mitzvah there. If so, the Yad Avram might actually make a lot of sense. Maybe there really is no kiyum ha-mitzvah for a doctor that doesn't successfully heal his patient. If so, maybe there's no issue with schar refuah. Why? Because what is the doctor charging for? The doctor is not charging for the result. He's not charging because he healed someone. He's charging for the action that he took, whether or not he accomplishes his goal. So he's not charging for the mitzvah. He's charging for a hechsher mitzvah, maybe, for something that he has to do, but he's not charging for the kiyum ha-mitzvah. If so, maybe there's no issue with ma'ani b'chinam, with taking schar for a mitzvah. But again, practically, this is probably not going to help doctors. The Mechaber paskins, the doctor can't take money. He doesn't limit it to cases where the doctor is only charging based on the outcome. And Schwartz pointed me to a piece that Rabbi Lamb has printed in Halachos v'Halichos, where he rejects the Yad Avram for a different reason. He thinks that the Yad Avram is maybe totally on a machlokas Rambam and Ramban about the Chiyuv refuah. And the Mechaber seems to pass like the Ramban. The Yad Avram might only work within the Rambam. Not for now, but that's another reason to reject this Yad Avram. And the Yad Avram's kasha about Galus, so the Aruch HaShulchan has a different explanation of the Shulchan Aruch. The Aruch HaShulchan says the Shulchan Aruch is only Mechayiv Galus in cases where the doctor was actually Posheya, where he messed up, something that he shouldn't have done, that he did. So that's where he's Chayiv Galus. Otherwise, if he was careful and Nebuch, the patient, ended up dying anyway, he's not actually Chayiv Galus because he did perform a mitzvah. So that's our second potential answer that probably will not help us. In source 10, the Imre Baruch, not Rabbi Simon, the Imre Baruch on the Shulchan Aruch, Siman Shin Lamed Vav, on this Mechaber, asks the following question. What if a guy knocks on the doctor's door, says, I will pay you $1 million to heal my cold? The doctor is not bound by Ma'ani B'chinam when it comes to the guy. But then the Jew knocks on his door and said, I don't have any money, can you heal my cold? Can the doctor charge the Jew much more than Schar Batala? Because right now, his Schar Batala, based on the situation that he's in, seems to be higher. In general, maybe the doctor would be willing to take less than $1 million to sit at home and twiddle his thumbs. Much less than $1 million. But this is a case where he doesn't really have to work all that hard and is standing to gain much, much more than usual. So maybe Schar Batala is much higher. Maybe he wouldn't be willing to take the regular Schar Batala to not go to work that day. Based on this Imre Baruch, Rav Shlomo Zalman, quoted in the Nishmas Avram, says that a doctor working in a hospital that also treats non-Jews is not bound by Schar Batala because he could have otherwise made the money from a non-Jew. There are two potential issues, I think, with this heter that I've come across. Reb Moshe, we'll see the Chiyuv Be'ezus Hashem later. Reb Moshe explains that in most of the cases, the Metzias just doesn't line up. The facts on the ground are not as the Imre Baruch presented it. Most of the time, a doctor has time to treat both patients. So you can't tell me that he's losing out on treating the guy because he treated the Jew. If he really wanted, he could have treated both. Rav Schachter also, I think, did not like this heter of Rav Shlomo Zalman. The way I understood what Rav Schachter was saying is that while maybe Schar Batala is higher in this case, it's not 100% of what the guy would have paid. So how is it mutter for a doctor to take 100% from the Jew? But Rav Shlomo Zalman seems, at least based on the way that the Nishmas Avram quotes him, he seems to be okay with this heter. Is there anything else for those that don't like Rav Shlomo Zalman's heter? So in source 11, the Rosh on that Mishnah in Bechoros asks a kasha. The Rosh asks, the Mishnah says it's asur for a dayan to take schar. However, there's a Gemara in Ksubis, maybe elsewhere, that talks about dayanim who took schar. How were they able to do that? The Rosh explains that there's an important distinction. When is it that we say a person's not allowed to take money for performing a mitzvah? That's when he has some other job. He's doing the mitzvah off on the side. So for that, he's not allowed to take money. But when it's kedei parnasasam, when this is their parnasa, when otherwise they would have to starve to death, of course it's mutter for them to take schar. This is not just a theoretical rush. The Shulchan Aruch and Hilchos Talmud Torah paskins like this rush. Again, the end of source 11. We know Talmud Torah is one of the cases where it's asur to take schar for performing a mitzvah. So just like the Mechaber allows it in Talmud Torah, maybe this would be a heter for doctors. The problem is that the lashon of the Rosh, the bolded part in source 11, seems to limit what a doctor would be allowed to take. So Shani Hassam, that case of the Dayanim was different. That was their entire business. They weren't able to do anything else because they were sitting and judging. Otherwise, they would have starved to death, and they needed to take kedei parnasasam, enough to make a parnasa. If we refer back to source 15, doctors take more than kedei parnasasam. Baruch Hashem, I think that there are software engineers and lawyers and accountants and financial advisors who make a parnasa for themselves. So what's the heter for a doctor to take more? So maybe that rush is not going to be so helpful. In source 12, the Tosas Yantif, on that Mishnah in Bechoros, and he quotes a very similar idea in his Sefer Divrei Chamudos on the rush, on that Gemara in Bechoros, has a chap. The Tosas Yantif says, when is it that there's an isser to take money for performing a mitzvah? That's only when I'm mechuyev in the mitzvah. What happens if my friend comes over to me and says, I have a business deal, I have a partner, I don't trust him. Seems like maybe not the most trustworthy guy. I would like someone there to witness the deal, so that if something goes wrong later, I have what to rely on. Am I mechuyev to go? Is that a mitzvah? I don't yet know any edus. I'm not testifying for him. I'm putting myself in a position where later I might have a mitzvah to testify. The Tosfos Yantiv says that's not included in ma'ani bechinam. That's not included in this Mishnah in Bechoros. I'm not mechuyev to put myself in a matziv that's mechayev me later to do something for free, to perform a mitzvah. Therefore, it's mutter for me to say, I'm willing to go, I'm willing to witness this deal, but pay me and I can charge whatever I want. If so, maybe that's what the doctor is relying on. Maybe he's saying, I'm only willing to open my office, to take a job in this hospital, to make myself available to cholim, if I get paid X amount of dollars. Right now he's not mechuyev, there's no chol b'fanav. So maybe the whole issue doesn't get off the ground. That's one possibility. Rav Shechter was a little hesitant to rely on this. He thought that the Tosfos Yantif only works if a person actually makes that Tanai beforehand. If he actually says, I'm only doing it for X amount of dollars, before he's in that situation where he's mechuyev to treat. Most doctors are only charging after the patient is already in the office. At that point, they're mechuyev in the mitzvah. There's no heter for them to take money. But maybe we can tweak the Tosfos Yantiv a little bit. In source 13, Rav Moshe has a very similar svara, but he adds on one knech. He adds on one twist. Rav Moshe explains that most Jews prefer Jewish doctors. And most Jewish doctors prefer to make a parnasa. That causes a problem if it's usher for Jewish doctors to make a parnasa, because then Jews won't have the Jewish doctors that they prefer. And what are they going to do? Therefore, Rav Moshe says, the bolded part, if a doctor is only willing to go to medical school in order to make a parnasa that he otherwise would make from the non-Jews, it is as if all Jews, all cholim, stipulated, we are willing to pay more. The doctor is not yet mechuyev in the mitzvah, and therefore that Tanai works. So Rav Shechter's objection to the Tosfos Yantif, that this Tanai only works if a person is masna beforehand, if a person stipulates beforehand, Rav Moshe thinks that it's understood. It's a given. This Tanai exists out there in the world. So again, if one accepts this svar of Rav Moshe, this explanation of the Mitzias, that would be a very good heter for doctors. And one should consult with their local Orthodox rabbi whether or not we accept this svar of Rav Moshe. But that's one potential solution. Rav Moshe then suggests in the second paragraph of this tshuva, and truth is it's really a much longer tshuva, I just quoted the end, so the second half of the part that I quoted, that maybe based on the Rush that we quoted before, the Rush says the isser of schar batala is only when a person has another job, he has another source of parnasa. It does not apply to cases where this is his source of parnasa. Rav Moshe extends that. The last part of the bolded section of this tshuva, v'harei harofei tzarich lefarnes atzmo umuter lo gam lehisasher mi parnasa zudafka. Rav Moshe adds on to the Rush. The Rush says it's mutter to make a parnasa. Rav Moshe says it's even mutter to become rich from it. Once the restriction of schar batala doesn't apply, all bets are off. A person can charge whatever they want. I'm not ra'oi to even question Rav Moshe's svaros, but I'm not 100% sure where he gets that from. The Rush itself, I thought, was already a little bit of a chiddush, that the isser, or the mitzvah of ma'ani b'chinam afatem b'chinam, doesn't apply in cases of parnasa. For Moshe to then extend it beyond what the Rush says seems to me to be a little bit of a chiddush, but again, where Moshe says it, so that's probably a good heter. The final suggestion that I would like to make is based on a Bach and Choshen Mishpat Simentes in regarding Dayanim, the laws of Dayanim. My Rabbi Roblowski pointed me to this Bach. The Bach quotes from a Tosfos and Ksubas. Again, explaining, I think, the steer that we saw in the Rush, that there were certain Dayanim who took Parnasa from the Tzibor. So the Tosfos and Ksubas doesn't give the answer of the Rush that it was their only source of Parnasa and therefore it was mutter. What Tosfos says is, let's just read the bolded part. V'od kasvu at Tosfos tiritz acher b'shem Rabbeinu Tam da'afilu in yesh lebezdin Parnasa v'gam ein yoshvin b'din kol shah. They have some other source of Parnasa. They're not constantly in the bezdin judging cases. Ela osim malacha, they have some other malacha to perform. Afilu hachi in isser netilat schar ladon, ela keshanotam mi balei dinim. The isser is when they take from the balei dinim, from the litigants that come before them. Aval keshanotam mi shal tzibor, shar. When they come to charge money from the tzibor, this is a government-appointed position. This is a communal position. That is going to be mutter. The Mishnah in Bechoros of notel schar ladon is limited to cases where I'm charging on a case-by-case basis, not when there is an annual, a weekly, a monthly schar. The Bach adds, not only is this a Tosfos that does a good job of answering a stira in sugyos, but v'nira the altir zeh samchu ha'idna b'malchusenu. Halacha l'maisa, the Bach says, this is what we rely on b'zman hazeh for communally appointed positions to take a schar from the tzibor. What I think emerges from the Bach is that the isser is to take money potentially on a case-by-case basis, potentially from litigants or patients that are coming in front of us, but that might not apply to every doctor. A doctor that has his own private practice and charges each patient that comes in, and he's responsible for whatever expenses the office has. So maybe this Bach wouldn't help him. But a doctor that works in a hospital, where he has an annual salary, a monthly salary, whatever it is, he's not taking money from each patient as part of what goes into his pocket. So yes, while it's true that the hospital, this big organization, might have some cheshbon that whatever percentage of what each patient pays goes to this doctor that's treating him, that's somewhat removed from the case that the Mishnah Bechoros is talking about. The Mishnah Bechoros is talking about where the litigant or the patient takes money out of his pocket and hands it to the dayan of the doctor. And it might even be better, because in most cases, the patient himself is not actually paying. The patient pays an insurance company, however frequently, amongst many other healthy people that are also paying the insurance company. That company is then paying the hospital. So we're already 2 steps removed. The patient is not paying the hospital, and the hospital is not paying the doctor based on the patient. So maybe, at least for doctors that are working in larger organizations, hospitals, whatever it may be, and who don't take commission based on patients, that might be a fair heter for them to take and not be bound by schar batala. I want to thank everyone again for coming. I want to extend a special thank you to the Weissman family. This really was a schus to be able to share Torah with everyone here today. Be'ezus Hashem will all be zocha to make whatever parnasa we need, benachas, beheter, and in a way that brings nachas to Hashem. Thank you.